Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to see that we have already so many people who didn't even wait for 10 a.m. but already joined. And we are ready to start with our first presentation. So on your screens, I hope you can see the first speaker that is going to officially open our summer school this year. Usually when he comes to our schools, he is the one who is closing the ceremonies. But this time, yes, things switched. So the things just gone the other way around. This is Robert Ford. I bet that those who have attended our sessions before know him already. And you have already read about him in our leaflet that we have sent to you before. So you can see Robert's information and his huge vocation and everything that he has dedicated his life to. Yes, teaching in this not very many words. I bet that he has even more to tell. And he's going to open our summer school. He's going to present the first session on one of our topics that is of most concern to all of us. Yes. So Robert, please, the floor is all yours.
Good morning, Bună dimineața. Yeah, it's a wonderful moment, as Larissa said. I've closed the conferences, and last year we were in the wonderful National Library in Chișinău. I'm coming to you this morning from my cabin at the bottom of my garden in Bristol in the UK, and we've all done so many of these conferences now in this fashion. But I think it's a really positive statement about education in Moldova and Eastern Europe. Somebody says I can't hear anything. Just tell me if my sound is okay.
Your sound is okay. Maybe they can, yes.
Perfect.
They can check.
Because we all hate, I'm going to talk about distance learning, and we all hate using technology sometimes. I would much rather be standing in front of you in person, but this is the world we're in at the moment. So if you bear with me, I will get my presentation up and we can begin. Children are still sleeping, I believe, so there we go.
Okay, so
can everybody see my presentation okay? Larissa, if I can ask you, and if that's fine.
No, yes.
I'll just put okay, I will begin. Let me just.
The internet, when we have many participants, the internet would, of course, go a little slower, but please be patient. Everything is going okay.
Perfect. Is that okay?
Okay, so not. Still need to wait a little bit, but I think that yes, we can see it. Yes, that's okay. Okay, that's okay.
Okay. Still there?
We're still losing you from time to time.
Start. Okay. Is that sound still not good? Now?
Yeah, the sound somehow went. Yes, it again goes down and up.
Not good. Am I okay now? I think it's.
We can do it another way around. You can send the presentation to me, and I will share it, and you are just going to talk, if that's okay, because I think that because of the sharing, the sound is going off.
I do a second. One more thing. We just try one more thing.
Now when you stop the screen sharing, yes, now when you stop the screen sharing, everything is okay. You can even attach it in the chat box.
Is that good? Let me try. How does that sound now? Is that okay?
Yes, okay.
At least I'm the first one to tell this, so you can hear me okay and you can see okay. Perfect. I think I know what the problem was. It was Okay, so it happens in our classrooms, doesn't it, all the time? Um, Thank you so much for the opportunity to open this wonderful conference. And I just want to say before I start, we're all indebted to the amazing work that Meta do to bring us all together as an education community. And I've thoroughly enjoyed my... Is that not working at all?
That's okay, that's okay.
Okay. Thank you. It's going to be one of those mornings, I feel. As I said, I'm Rob Ford. I'm the director of Heritage International School, and I've also been a British Council Schools Ambassador for goodness knows how many years now, advising on curriculum, on international partnerships, and on leadership. And as you're aware, I've been in Moldova now for over a year as the director of Heritage. It's certainly an interesting time to come and join the school and to come and live in Moldova. I've worked with Moldova for about 6 or 7 years and with schools across Eastern Europe. And I think the energy and the sort of the mindset of our education communities is what's drawn me to come and kind of base myself there. We were presented as an education community across the world with one of the biggest challenges, if not the biggest challenge for education for decades. And we've all still trying to find out what it will look like because we're not out of this crisis yet. If I can just have you have a look at this slide here. It's not something new if we look back in history. We've always had to try and find problems, solutions to problems when we educate children. And if I use my history teacher's hat, in times of World War, you can see the children there wearing gas masks in London during the Blitz when the bombs were raining down. They didn't cancel school. They didn't send children home and tell them to sit at home for 6 months or 6 years. They found a solution. And most of you will be familiar with what happens in countries such as Australia or Canada or Russia with huge distances and populations that are scattered in remote areas. But in Australia, they pioneered online school, as it were, for decades and found ways where children will continue to be educated. In the American Midwest, prairie schools were set up. And even though that meant huge distances often to walk to school or to sometimes board near the school, this was a solution. And I don't know if you can see the last photograph there, but these are children in China doing their daily commute to school up their mountain. So as an education community, we have always found solutions, and we've used technology and we've used what's available to make sure our children are educated. And this crisis is no different. And what's interesting about technology and the response to technology is that everything has changed something about the way we teach and to facilitate more effective teaching or more effective learning. But I have to say, nobody ran around saying that the overhead projector or the pencil in 1900 was going to revolutionize teaching. Each time technology has enhanced what we do, we found a way to fit that into the classroom. And I always find it interesting when you look at old photographs, this Victorian photograph here of a classroom from the 1890s, the children all in rows in their uniforms, the teacher, the classroom assistant, the instructions. And then you look at a classroom, a blended flipped classroom of the 2020s. And I still feel there's a connection between the two. In fact, I think teaching is still Socratic. I think, you know, the influence and importance of a good teacher in front of the class, behind the class, to the side of the class, involved with the class, is still what makes the huge difference. And we look at Hattie's work and we look at, so I've kind of always been a bit frightened when you sit in conferences and somebody says, this will change and revolutionize teaching. I think the crisis has made us more conscious of the importance of digital learning and digital platforms. But I also feel that at the same time, we've put that into the way we teach. And as I'm going to go through my presentation, all of us have made that work for us. So what I want to do this morning in the time that I've got, I just want to give you a quick look at why I became a teacher, and also I think this key question for you throughout this conference, when we often talk and reflect upon our educational sort of remits and our classrooms and our schools, is also to remember why we are teachers and why we work in education specifically. I want to talk about Heritage International School and the global sort of philosophy and ethos behind our school. I then want to give you a look at the COVID-19 crisis and then what Heritage did in this crisis linked to the national education community of Moldova. I want to finish off by actually taking this idea of, have we seen a paradigm shift in education? Are we now reimagining the education for the 2020s? And what will that mean and what will that look like? So, my background and my influences. Fairly ordinary. I'm a working class boy from the Welsh and English borders, from the county of Shropshire. My father was a coal miner. He's there, just there with the teeth showing. He worked underground for nearly 40 years. Like many coal miners, he didn't want his children to take the same profession, not that coal mining exists anymore, as we've gone to more sustainable sources of energy. But I was very fortunate. I was the first in my family to go to university. I had good teachers such as my teacher and my mentor here, Les Jones, who instilled into me the sense of the transformative power of learning and of education. And I think when all of us look at our backgrounds and we look at those moments that transformed and changed us and put us onto our pathways, we know that we're replicating those daily with the students in our classrooms. And therefore I come to this question, really. There's me back in the late 1990s, where probably some of our colleagues in the conference this morning were not even born, or maybe sort of very small children. But when I first had my sort of real job as a history teacher, my first class, you know, I've asked myself constantly every summer when we've had a break and we've reflected, what made us want to work in education? What made us want to work with these young people? These kids now, they're not kids, they're in their 30s. They've got families of their own. Some of them are teachers. They hold positions in society. So everything that we do is having this positive influence. I think, you know, we're rightly applauding the health workers, and we're recognizing people who work in shops and clean our streets in this crisis. But I also feel that teachers have had a pretty hard time, as people have said, get the kids back to school, or, you know, why are you sort of not educating my children in the normal sense? And I think when you look at the importance of our profession for the wider public good, of how we make sure that the future is in good hands, these are key questions. I mentioned Eastern Europe and my sort of interest, and it was a teacher that actually inspired me. I was very fortunate as a history student to have a history visit to West Berlin, literally as the wall came down. It wasn't planned that way. And I think my fascination with working in Eastern Europe as opposed to Western Europe probably stemmed from there as a student of history and politics, and standing on the Berlin Wall as a 16-year-old at that moment of history. That inspired me, and that inspired me in education. And like you, I've taken my career on, and I've been able to develop in my history lessons technology. We were using video conferencing for the first time when children were wanting to know what students thought about issues like World War II or the Holocaust in Germany or in Russia. And all this is a facilitation, and we find methods to engage our students in meaningful lessons which aren't abstract, which actually are related to the real world. Working in international education was something I never planned to do. I love travel and I like seeing the world, but to actually work and connect classrooms and to take a role as a British Council ambassador and to work in Southeast Asia, in Bali, in Siberia, around Europe, in Thailand, Indonesia, Canada, to see classrooms around the world and to see ourselves as educators. I took part in a conference last week, and I was very disappointed to hear an English head teacher, a principal, say that the rest of the world couldn't teach them much. I don't know if that's a Brexit mindset, but I was very disappointed to hear that in the conference. I challenged it because we know that the more we are outward facing and the more that we look to what others are doing, we find common solutions. I don't think teaching is that different in terms of the basics and the values and pedagogy. And so I think through international education, I've always found a source of different ideas and different cultures and different sort of ways of working, but actually all enhancing as teaching evolves, as the way that we learn has evolved, the way that society has been rapidly transformed, certainly in the last few decades. I'll come back to this. The UK is a very, very high stakes accountability culture. I hope other countries don't follow this, because I think it's actually destroying a profession. I think it's destroying a lot of people's ability. The recruitment in the UK is appalling. People don't want to become teachers because of the workload, as how they see the poor conditions. And I think Einstein was right. There are so many things that we can count that we actually don't count. And actually, many of the times we're counting the wrong things in this job. And I think I've used this slide many times because it still exists. I saw the bus the other day. On the back of a bus as I go around Bristol, there's a school that actually models itself not far from here, that it's not an exams factory. It's not just an exams factory. And I think as we go into the 2020s, we've got to be looking at what is our holistic education about? And this crisis, in many respects, with blended and flipped learning, has really made us think about what are we preparing children for in a very, very uncertain world right now. So let me come to Heritage. Heritage International School, and what's different about this school? Well, Heritage International School is the first truly international school in Moldova, and by that I mean it's based on an international curriculum, the Cambridge curriculum of IGCSEs and A-levels. It's English medium as a language, but also Romanian and Russian as well, because the majority of students are local students, but it also has a great deal of international families from the diplomatic community, the embassies, NGOs. And the values of Heritage are about a holistic curriculum. It's about preparing children for the challenges of the future and being able to tackle them confidently and not be frightened by these challenges. So in far as the vision aims of the school, it's about this ambitious culture. It's about believing in people. And I think this is also where some countries have gone wrong, where they've become far more about the sort of physical organization. And actually, what drives schools, as we saw in this crisis, is our people. They're our best assets. And we need that positive school culture, that cohesion. We need to be looking at our world-class sort of benchmarks as how we become professional more and we take on new ideas. The 21st century curriculum, well, we're 20 years into the 21st century, so it's almost faded to use this term now, but we're still using so many methods and practices which have kind of fallen by the wayside in many systems and many countries. I also think the notion of leadership needs a complete rethink in so many schools and in so many systems. And leadership isn't about a domino or a vojt at the top in an authoritarian model. And when I worked in Indonesia, as they were coming out of a military dictatorship, some of the work we did there was how to get people to actually not see the titles or to see the person at the top as the person of the font of all knowledge, because that's not how the best organizations work. If you look at some of the modern companies from Silicon Valley, Google, Apple, it's been that creativity and that sense of belonging, and everybody has value and everybody has this idea within systems and structures that's allowed those countries to be so successful. 21st century learner, we can spend a long time looking at this. In fact, most of us do. But I would suggest that taking this from the IB and the British Council, we know our 21st century learners are going to be more independently learning. They're going to be critical thinkers. They're going to problem solve. Their communication skills are incredible. They're globally aware. I love the fact that the teen TikTok movement are being credited with Donald Trump not having a good turnout at his conference at Tulsa on the weekend. I mean, that's power for you young people. Innovative, media literate, civically engaged, that social responsibility, which is important for us at Heritage especially. And this is the sort of skills that we need to keep developing in our young people in our curriculum. And as we know, the SDGs underpin so much of our education and get more and more relevant. The UNDP do incredible work in Moldova, some wonderful projects, as we all know. And SDGs underpin a curriculum and also ensure that we are creating leaders who will make sure our world is a much better place. So this is a question which often comes up. What would you describe, how would you describe internationally mindedness? Well, they're open about their common humanity. They respect other cultures and beliefs. They understand other cultures and beliefs. They will use critical thinking and discussion and collaboration. They're all aiming for a world which is better, sustainable. I also think that when we're internationally minded, we are actually proud of who we are in terms of our local identity. And we know that Moldova being at the crossroads of Europe, there's many conflicts and historical and sometimes present about identity and language and culture and direction. And that's not new for any country. My own country in the UK has had 4 or 5 years, if not more, of trying to define where it is right now. But I think when we develop internationally minded citizens, global citizens in our curriculum, then we start again to produce those leaders for the future. And I'll just take, I mean, you know, I love Twitter, or those of you that know me, and I always chuckle when people say Moldova doesn't do Twitter. Well, it does, and we use all forms of social media because we've got to get our messages out. And I'm really, the year we've had, even, you know, in the crisis of developing this type of education, of giving our students more experiences, more real-time people to come in. And these people, ambassadors, heads of companies, university academics, human rights lawyers, they all want to engage with young people. They all want to help them link to that wider world. And with our technology, we can connect to classrooms around the world. Those of you that do e-twinning know the remarkable work of e-twinning and other schemes. I know America House did a wonderful conference only last week looking at that partnership with North Carolina and some of the work they've done there. And I think what I'm really proud of at Heritage is how all the teachers, I work with remarkable educators and support staff because they're crucial to how our schools operate and they often get overlooked. But this entire team are committed to making sure, as they are in your own schools, that our children, our students, get exposed to the very best of what's been said and what's been thought, and their education becomes meaningful, and they enjoy going to school. They like the engagement. And let's all be honest here, it doesn't matter how effective distance learning has been, all students have missed the physical school. They've all missed the noise in the classrooms, the buzz, the atmosphere, their friends, their daily routines. And I'll come on to this as we go through the talk. I'm really proud that in the summer edition of International School magazine, there's some of the Heritage teachers on the front there, that we made the front cover of this prestigious international publication about developing a positive school culture. And I wrote an article, I can send the link, about a smooth sea, never ever made for a skillful sailor. My article talked about leadership in particular, but how these times do test us, and we actually find out what we're made of. We find out what our responses are under pressure, under these crises. And this is basically what confronted all of us, everybody in education around the world, when this crisis hit. So I want to look at now as moving on to the response that we had and how this was linked to what we did to work with our national education community. So 2020, as we know, I saw a lovely meme that said 2020 written by Stephen King, directed by the Pulp Fiction director, whose name escapes me for now. And it has been a remarkable, shocking 6 months so far, and we're still not through this. Back in February, I went back to London to speak at the British Council's Ambassadors Conference. At that point, we knew that schools in China were being affected, and Hong Kong and Thailand. And one of our parents was actually head of the WHO in Moldova. We came in to give a talk for our Founders Lectures series. And we were all talking and learning about coronavirus and COVID-19. I have to say, when I went to London in February, no one spoke about it. It wasn't seen as a thing that was going to engulf us. But already, looking back in hindsight, it was obvious what was happening. So I went and closed the conference in London, this huge ambassadors conference that we have in the UK. And then I flew out to Cairo for the Schools Now conference, about 300 international schools from around the world, and I gave the keynote to start the conference there. But it was there that I realized, when I was speaking to international colleagues, of what was happening in their schools and what they'd had to do. And actually, it was a principal from Hong Kong who had spent 2 months already on their distance learning plan. And when I got back into Moldova on I think the Friday the 6th of March, it was obvious what needed to be done. And again, we don't need to reinvent the wheels. If we're in a collaborative educational community and we're open-minded and we start to look for solutions, they're there. And I was very fortunate because I'd spoken to several principals. I'd looked at their distance learning plans. I mean, we've all got crisis management frameworks and matrix and systems. As school leaders, if the school has a flood or there's electricity goes off or those kind of things, a fire, none of us have a plan to take an entire school online for, say, a semester or a term, and that was the difference. And right from the beginning, we had to take on this mentality that this could be for a long time, and so therefore it wasn't like a snow day closure. So we developed quite a sophisticated international school, distance learning plan, which had guidelines for the parents, because that was really important. We had the trust and confidence of our parents right from the beginning for our students. And in the very short time we had to try and get all our teachers trained. Now, we used Google Suites. There was lots of other platforms available. We took the decision that we would have daily lessons because we had the digital capability on the whole to do a distance learning plan like this. Now, here's the thing that's going to run through this talk now. There is not one size fits all. And I've seen so many different solutions, and we've all got used to this language of new normal. So we talk about synchronous learning, we talk about asynchronous learning, we talk about some online learning, we talk about some offline learning. It is whatever fitted the school community and the school resources and the school capabilities. And I think there were some people, I mean, this always happens, consultants, advisors, people who become experts overnight, spending 5 minutes in a classroom, and then a consultant selling very expensive solutions which don't always fit your scenario. And we were trying to all find solutions very quickly in a short space of time as this crisis engulfed governments. Governments didn't know how to respond. And what we did was found a solution that worked for us as a school. And within a couple of days, we were able to get our mindset established, our principles. The most important thing in my mind wasn't necessarily that we had to have, a replication of school. But everybody said you cannot, have your sort of normal school day in any shape, sense, form, well-being of students. But what we had to do was make sure that we had something, that we had our routines, that we had interactions on a regular basis, that we had engaging learning. And it took everybody out of our comfort zone, me included especially. And I was petrified at moments. But here's the difference when you're in a good organization and a good team of colleagues. All of them found solutions together. And we, often found ourselves divided by language sometimes, and sometimes by different experiences. But here we were united, and it was a really strange moment of where Heritage is only 3 years old, but it really stood on its feet in this crisis. And soon, first couple of weeks in, it was astonishing how it became the normal from the normal. And at the end of March, the Minister of Education then, Mr. Popovich and State Secretary Guru, came to the school on the Saturday and spent the Saturday with us. And as far as I'm concerned for Heritage, our mission is also about the fact that we are in an amazing education community in Moldova, as well as a global one with the rest of the world. And so we gladly sat down and explained how our model worked of distance learning. We explained the principles. We explained the idea that we had to have something for education for children. We could not have children sitting at home doing nothing for months. We explained the difficulties, and some of you sitting at home now in this conference know that not everybody has the digital capabilities. I mean, most kids have smartphones, most people, connection, Wi-Fi, all the things that we've talked about this morning. I'm sitting 3,000 kilometers away from you in the UK. We've had issues with sound, as these things do. All of these things added to how we thought this should work, but it had to work. Doing nothing was not an option, and we explained this to the ministry. We also looked at other solutions that there were plenty of things offline. There was wonderful examples of schools in the Midwest in the States where they didn't have digital capability, and they were driving around dropping off lesson packs. They were making sure they were using things like Vocaroo voice message, or they were making sure they telephoned to check that kids were okay and that families were okay. And all of us didn't sit back and just try to ride the crisis out and the lockdown and the physical isolation and all those things that came with it. And I was so proud of Moldova and what the Moldovan response was, especially when I looked at my own sort of home country and how leaders in schools and kids and communities were let down so badly by the ambiguous messages coming out of London. And we did something really special here. Now, lots of us have examples where this took a long time to work. I'm going to say this now because it's the elephant in the room. It's not because Heritage is a private school. There are plenty of private schools who have way more money and didn't do half as much, or certainly didn't do anything as near, and that's in all countries. It wasn't about just because you have the money or you have. It's much deeper than that. It's about having the leadership. It's about having the capabilities. I had teachers who'd been working with eTwinning and other projects, Meta, who knew how to use things like Google platforms and classrooms and Zoom. And these technologies were transferred and spread, and people trained one another and they talked to one another. And that really developed. And obviously, the media industry was huge. The national TV came in, and when we could, before the lockdown got really severe at the end of March and April. But it was about doing nothing. We could not just sit back and wait several months for this to pass, not for the well-being and the mental health for our young people. And it doesn't, one size does not fit all. So it was about trying to find solutions that fitted individual communities, individual schools. And I think on the whole, Moldova's response was much better than many countries across Europe that should have perhaps done a lot better. Normal school continued. There's my colleague, you might know, Tatiana Popper. We got an eTwinning school label. We worked with conferences and groups across Europe with these talks. We had book collections coming in still when we could. We kept the normal school going. I mean, the new normal, that's almost become a cliche now, but the challenges that we had, and we needed to get the trust and confidence of everybody in the community, and these new routines about learning remotely. Our school newsletter continued every week, as it does. We put more articles in there. We put more pieces in there about reflecting physical distancing and learning from home. Our student councils continued to meet weekly. Our staff meetings continued weekly. Just as important, okay, from my point of view as director, to make sure my colleagues were okay, and they weren't sitting, they were trying to do this at home with their families. I mean, I cannot even imagine. I mean, my family were in the UK, so I was away from mine for 3 months, and I was struggling in my own isolation. But this is where we were all together in this, and we then began to sort of work with the ministry on training and being able to sort of the webinar materials. I think what the ministry has done in terms of producing videos for asynchronous lessons and really getting people across, education community in Moldova, national education community, looking for solutions is a pretty strong model. And lots of us might say it didn't work as well as we wanted it to do, but I have to say it was a much better response as a country than many, many others. And when you have colleagues in Romania and Turkey and other places actually saying, this is pretty impressive. And I know this because I've worked with colleagues from across the globe, and I've been in many conferences over the last few months online. We were with one with India and Indonesia on the weekend. I'm doing Eton College tomorrow, the most famous and prestigious private school in the world, to talk about international learning and what we did in Moldova. So the flag of our country has been flying really high. But this has been really challenging times for all of us as we found solutions for this crisis and this lockdown. And if you go online, our distance learning plan is down. We shared it. We did not money to be made from this. It's not exclusive to us. The way that we develop, as we know, as educators over the years, is by collaboration, by sharing ideas, by discussions, by seeing what works, by seeing what doesn't work, seeing what fits, what doesn't fit, and that's how we benefit all our students, all our children in our country. I have to say, I know Larissa's in the conference. She said hello this morning, and it'll be interesting. The conference goes on to discuss, because we're analysing now what happened. But some of the learning that I saw was so creative and so rich. Our music teacher there, Nina, did some incredible work online. Lots of people did our science lessons online. Some of the work the children did at home, essay writings, and I think creativity had a really big boost in this crisis, and not just those wonderful rainbow pictures, but the way that we were all trying to work. Our parents got to see our classrooms. Now that in itself, most of us are parents. I've got 3 children, 3 daughters. That was not a nice experience for our teachers on lots of levels, to know that suddenly maybe they were, being heard and seen. But it also got parents to appreciate exactly the work we do every day and how difficult it is, 5 hours, 6 hours, in educating young people, especially in the societal pressures that we have now. And the new minister, I have to say that the ministry and the way this has developed since March is a much better, and preparation for a second wave, or if we had to use this again. And as I say, I've been sharing our stories and our message, and so have other colleagues of mine, to audiences around the world, Asia, North America, to talk about what we did in Moldova and what we did in our schools. And as I said, it's not about being online. It's about students having something to do meaningfully and routines. And we're really interested in our activities week for Easter. The ministry obviously picked up the same idea, and being able to set work for students. I love the fact that virtual museums and virtual art galleries are now open. Virtual online libraries. I think the National Library in Chisinau has done a great job with this and supporting education. So to try and get an entire education system and shift it over, and I think there's some really good minds right from the very top in the Ministry of Education, and that we could make sure that we weren't studying in the summer, we weren't having to try and make this time up. I think we've all had to respond to this crisis as we knew it would continue. And the training continues. We all become more experienced in how to use our technology and enhancing it in our lessons. We've been involved in the UNICEF project across the world now with this as well. I'm going to I did an interview. I think the work of Valentina Urso and Radio for Europe is wonderful. She's a brilliant journalist. And I did an interview with her about where we were with the crisis and what happened. And also, I also, this picture shows you, again, the new normal. We shouldn't be sort of shaking hands or fist bumping myself. That was Mr. Popovich. And we've all learned these new social behaviors as well. But I'll come back to the point that the minister, or the former minister himself, said on his Facebook. Doing nothing wasn't an option. That's the most important mentality that I had in my mind as a school leader. We could not just sit back and hope this crisis would go away. And unfortunately, a lot of people did sit back and think this will go away, and it didn't. So, to come towards the end of my talk now, has there been a paradigm shift in education? Are we now reimagining education for the future? Well, I've already said to you that I think the most overwhelming feeling of our young people is to get back together in school. And we've already seen how that lockdown unlocking looks in Denmark, in Holland, in Hong Kong, in France. We know that the case numbers are still rising in Moldova as restrictions have eased. That's the case in most countries. We've tried to balance economic considerations, social pressures of people being isolated for so long. Against that, there's still not a solution to this virus. I want to just refer to a very important seminal piece of work by Microsoft, by one of my heroes, the Canadian education writer Michael Fullan. And they have done, there's a few studies now starting to emerge over the last few months. There's plenty of material to research and to draw some strong conclusions and analysis from. But I would point you to this publication, this research, Education Reimagined: The Future of Learning by Microsoft, and it's a position paper. And it's not going to jump, as you can imagine, to everybody that they be online, everybody needs distance learning. But their strategy, if I just go through their research, they looked at what happened initially, so that disruption. So for us, what happened in March and April. The second one is the transition, which is where we are now as a country, because we're on summer holiday now, but all of us are planning and thinking about what's going to happen on the 2nd of September. How does our lockdown unlock? We know that we will not be having our normal traditional start of the academic year with, flowers and wonderful clothes and parents and children starting a new. We know all that will be different because we know that physical restrictions will still be in place, and we've seen that in other schools. But that transition is really important. And the third phase was this reimagining. What have we learned from this crisis? Are we going to just forget the fact that we were able to find all sorts of innovative, digital, creative ways of now learning? And actually, is it more about putting some of those models together and hybrid learning, as it's called? I'll do a quote from there. Our success was driven by our people being ready to be adaptive, innovative in the context that we're in. This COVID-19 moment, an unfortunate situation, but the good news is our educators and our staff had built their capacity and continued to be adaptable. That was Phil Neufeld from California in the Microsoft report being quoted. The word adaptability, I think, is one of the strongest words I always think about when I think of teachers and education. We are so adaptable. We all can think about our classrooms when something goes wrong, where our lesson plan doesn't go the way we think it's going to go, where something comes in with our children, something that happened at home on the weekend, something that totally changes things. We know that funding is one of those things where we have to be adaptable to. We know technology changes things, societal pressures changes things. I think as educators, we are extraordinarily adaptable. And this is what happened in this crisis. This is what brought the best out of us. And I think that's worth bearing that in mind. I think where we are in terms of reflecting on the next stages forward, as we're supporting our communities back to school, and we're supporting our parents, and we're supporting our colleagues, is where do we take this next? Where do we take what are the lessons from this? Do we have to use it again? Will it be used in a different way? Personally speaking, looking at the lockdown in the UK, I cannot see people willing to put up with a lockdown that was so severe as we saw in Moldova or in other parts of the world in the same way. So this is why the hybrid system and be prepared for it. We know that at its peak, 90%, 1.6 billion students were out of school. Remote learning was the quick fix, but we're not sure that's going to look the same way again. We also know that there was a huge gap between those that could go online to find this as a quick fix because of access and connectivity, and lots of vulnerable kids, lots of students in communities that didn't have the digital platforms. They actually missed out on schooling. There's a report in the UK where it said that a third of children right now have had no school for 3 months, and it will be 6 months by the time schools well, that's an appalling figure. We don't know what that damage will do to them. The OECD have also produced some pretty good research on this, looking at 98 countries and this idea of the new norm. If you look at some of these points here that underpin why people tried to find solutions and what the results were, that continuity of learning for our students, and I talked about the routines and the certainties to give them, whatever that looked like, and the regular keeping in touch. A lot of our students did not have independent study skills to work from home. I watched it actually with my own children as they were on our distance learning plan from Heritage and how they developed themselves. But that's been something I would say that's really come out strongly, the way that some of our students have adapted to independent learning. The continuity and integrity of students' actual learning, how we assess what they've learned. Just giving them some work to occupy, isn't learning. And we discovered that actually, there's a wonderful meme as well that said Maslow before Bloom's. Well, we're looking at well-being first and what we do to support them that way. Parents are really crucial in all of this. I think our parents personally at Heritage have been phenomenal. I couldn't ask for a better group of parents in our community and the way they've supported our student learnings from home. And I'll come back to the well-being of all our students and our teachers, which again has been highlighted in this report. Right. Reflections on where we are then from this crisis. I'll just pick up a few points from this. One size doesn't fit all. We know that. Nobody should stand in a conference and say, complete distance learning plan, 6 lessons a day. I think all schools found a solution that served their communities. I think we've all been affected in different ways and will live with us for a while on this. The situation right now, as we know, is in flux. It's dynamic. We don't know how this will look. This might continue for months. It might continue into 2021. We saw universities already planning to have online lectures to put students' huge numbers together in lecture halls. But we need to look at that well-being and quality learning and equity when we continue to plan our education for our young people in the next year or so, and look at what that will mean for them as they go into the 2020s. All those structures, those processes, and those policies. We had to find a quick fix, quite rightly so, as this Microsoft report said. But now we have the time to reflect on what this could look like and should look like, as if we need it again. Let me just. And in terms of learning, traditional versus deep learning, I'm a huge sort of voice against the kind of the zeitgeist of binary false choices, traditional or deep. We have it in the UK on Twitter between progressives and traditional. It's such a nonsense label. 90% of teachers don't go on Twitter in the UK, but some of these voices like to magnify and amplify. There's lots of things we take from here between what's traditional learning, what's deeper learning. And Michael Fullan's work is very much geared towards deeper learning for students. And I think a lot of deeper learning opportunities have come from this crisis, but at the same time, if it's not equitable, lots of our students are going to be disadvantaged. Lots of our students have fallen behind. And that's going to be in the minds of all of us when we get our students and our community back together. But there's lots of things to think about where we've shifted our learning. We've seen some wonderful flipped and blended learning examples. We've seen our classrooms change and transformed and ourselves change as teachers as well. But where will this go? What will this look like in the next 10 years? Andy Solberg, the Finnish education writer, is now in Australia. Wonderful article at the start of June, and some images there of classes returning to school. But he gave 5 tips. Don't think kids only learn when they are taught. We all know that as teachers. There's an informal curriculum, there's the holistic curriculum. It's not just about sitting in a lesson. Don't worry about kids' losses on school tests. We've seen that with exams. I feel for the generation of children who've had their graduation, but they haven't sat their exams, and where that leaves them. Don't expect our kids to be ready to continue where they left off. There's lots of talk about recovery curriculums at the moment for when kids return to school, but I think there's a lot of work to do on well-being. I think a lot of children will just want to be getting on with it in the classrooms personally. Recess breaks. Those are really important opportunities. We might feel the need to cram them into lessons. And the last point, I think, for all of us, there's not going to be a new normal anytime soon, much as we like to. I want to give you some thoughts for this conference, which I spoke about in London and in Cairo a few months ago. I think we've got to also think beyond this crisis. We've got to think about the 2020s. And I'm going to give 10 points here. I think the relevance of global education has never been more important, the way that we're interconnected, the way that we want to develop outward-facing individuals. Donald Trump calls these people globalists. Well, I'm a proud globalist, if that means I'm a citizen of the world, as well as being proud of where I'm from. Fragmented networks. What I was really proud about and seeing in Moldova, and I've always been proud about this in Moldova and in Eastern Europe, is the way that schools collaborate. Schools that are constantly in competition waste so much energy. And I understand some are in market situations, but at the same time, fragmented networks haven't helped. I think one of the most positive benefits of this crisis was the way that certain international schools and schools in national education communities like Moldova collaborated together. We've got global education champions. We've got whole new groups of teachers, young teachers who were probably thinking of retiring, but have suddenly found a whole new spirit of education in this. I think as we go into the 2020s, it's hard not to be aware of the narrative of identity politics and populism, especially in countries like Hungary, Russia, the United States, the UK, and how that sort of is affecting education, the way we teach it. I've said about false binary choices and false equivalents. If we can teach our kids to be critical thinkers and to actually spot the fake news and spot the bots and actually allow discussion and safe spaces to talk about issues and difficult issues like race or religion or equality, gender equality, LGBT rights, that's important. People talk about the Google age. Well, information is not knowledge and it's not wisdom. And I think we've got to get over to our children this idea of deeper learning and deeper understanding. I think this is the work of Michael Fullan, that actually this shallow learning, knowing something at the top level because you've read Wikipedia, that doesn't make you an expert. And we've got to get our kids into that. But they do also need to carry so much knowledge in their heads, we think. Traditional support and organisations are changing. The definition of the curriculum is changing. So many mega global trends that we are looking at still. Climate change. You know, we've seen huge drops in pollution and the impact on the environment of this crisis and all economic activity stopping. But it's going to come back to us. The most important point for me is 10, if you work in education. Our young people right now need hope. They need to know that the world is a better place, that the 2020s and their lives are going to mean something, and they're going to have the ability to lead the world in a much better way. 100-year-old Captain Tom in the UK, you might have seen him, walked and raised tens of millions for the health service. Okay, these people need that kind of image and those figures to remind them of what we can do when we work together, and the world is a good place. And that's what we need in agency and in leadership. I refuse to see the world in perhaps the lens that we see it right now, and that awful image of George Floyd being murdered by a policeman on camera. And we've seen all of this now spark across the state. I don't know if you saw this picture in London, the protests in London, where a Black Lives Matter supporter helped a far-right supporter because he was injured. Images like that are so powerful. They speak thousands of words, and they show us what the world should and could be. And I refuse to see that Trump or Boris Johnson is the future of the world. I think the power of this picture, these two young women, they are the leadership examples for our students. They are the leadership examples for us to go forward. Their agency. Malala's just graduated from Oxford. Remarkable achievement for somebody who was left for dead because she dared to go to school as a girl. And her father, I love when her father said, Malala used to be my daughter, now I'm her father. And the way that they have allowed those voices to amplify and give our young people, the teen TikTok generation, the say in the world. Finish. If it's time for discussion, and if not, there's discussion throughout this conference. Teaching is a creative profession. We're not a delivery system. You as great teachers in this conference, you mentor, you stimulate, you provoke, and you engage. and we saw that at its finest in this crisis recently. It continued for us at Heritage. Our students were involved yesterday, talking to India, Indonesia, Nigeria about the work we're doing. I saw who's in the conference and a big Meta supporter and participant, working with Cambridge and preparing. It continues. All the work continues, and we have not. I'll send this in the presentation, but there's a wonderful course free by the British Council, Future Learn, about teaching online, and it's a 3-week course, I think, but there's plenty of CPD. I think the quality of the CPD and professional development in this crisis has been amazing, and I think that again shows us at our best when we cover students. And I think for his own children, this is where I'm sitting now in my cabin. I've made sure they are doing some work. They are also enjoying their Fortnite and their Minecraft, and we're also getting out to walk. That was a walk we did last week. But our future generations, you know, the decisions that we're making now and the example we're giving them, you know, they need to know there is hope in this world. There's not false binary choices, that these are the outward facing global citizens, proud of who they are, proud of their identity, and proud going forward. And those of you who know Moldova is a wonderful place. I'm very proud of my adopted country, and to continue working there. And my blog is there, my contact details. I'm sorry about the start of this talk, but that's the technology. I am so grateful always to the wonderful work that Meta does and for the opportunity to speak to you this morning. And I wish you a wonderful conference ahead. Lots to share, lots to learn, lots to reflect on, lots to take forward and make all our students have better education. Mulțumesc, spasibo, thank you.
Thank you very much, Rob. It was wonderful. Again, you gave us a lot to think of and to reflect on. But again, you were right. During this crisis, I myself, again, reassured and was happy to discover that we have wonderful teachers who are ready to learn and to do lots of things, even if they don't know how to do those. So this is something that supports us a lot and gives us very powerful meaning for everything that we do. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you for being so early morning, Monday morning on your vacation with us. And really, as I usually say this for all of this time, really hope to see you face to face very, very soon. Okay, so this will be